remember this? This is the buffalo. Some of you remember the buffalo. So required viewing for this video is our Final Fantasy deep dive, where we looked at GameWorks implementation and just objects in general, where the game was drawing objects that were not anywhere near the player. This is something that we were not only able to validate with other software outside of Ansel, but also Square Enix posted a series of tweets that more or less acknowledged the issue and said that they were working towards a solution. So what was the issue then? The quick recap is that there was severe performance loss in most of the benchmark utility because aspects of the game that the player was nowhere near were being rendered anyway, thus causing lower performance than would seem appropriate for what was being shown on screen. Today we're revisiting with the playable demo of Final Fantasy 15 to see if that's been improved. Before that, this video is brought to you by the new CableMod Pro series. CableMod's new Pro cables come with pre-installed closed combs for clean builds, accompanied by a revamped color, style, and vibrance. The cables are now using thicker wires, and they've also added right-angled internal USB 3 extension and right-angled SATA data cables. Buy the Pro Series cable kits at the link below, or customize your cable set with the configurator also linked below. So first up, the settings have changed significantly from previously. Previously, the settings options were light, standard, and high, and there were differences within them that you had to hunt and find because the settings specifics were not exposed to the user. In fact, in order to change the settings at all, beyond those three presets, you had to use external software to expose the INI files, and this is obviously not an expected use case by Square Enix. So we were able to use some of that software and change the settings files, which allowed us to do independent GameWorks on-off A/B testing. And one of the things that troubled us was that the GameWorks settings were only on with the high option and were off with the standard option. However, there were other things changed as well, like view distance and other quality detail settings that were not related to GameWorks. So it made it difficult to individually check what was causing what performance hit. And so we were able to isolate those variables and test them. One of the numbers off the top of my head was HairWorks on versus off could cause a 17% performance hit on nVidia and something like a 37% performance hit on AMD. The result of which was visible in gameplay most of the time, and most problematic was that this performance hit existed even when you were miles away from any objects with HairWorks, because the main characters in the game do not use HairWorks. In fact, we have screenshots of their hair meshes from an application, a debugging application, where you can see that they're just meshes. It's not HairWorks. So we know that the characters aren't using HairWorks. However, there were buffalo in the game that use HairWorks, and in the playable demo, there are a couple of characters as well and monsters that use HairWorks. So we're going to do a really quick test just to see if anything's improved. This is not a super in-depth GPU benchmark because the game is still going to change from today to the final launch. So we might as well just wait till then at this point. Our first objective was to determine whether the unnecessary HairWorks issue had been resolved, as that was causing the biggest performance concern overall. Previously, we were seeing, again, somewhere between 17 and 40% performance deficit depending on which card and which setting, and this was a result of the buffalo that were rendering 100% of the time, something that Square Enix indirectly confirmed later, and through other sources we've confirmed as well. So our initial findings were absolutely correct, and hopefully those problems will be resolved today. And as we get into this chart, I think you'll see that they mostly are, because now, as we look at the first test site, the service station, we noticed that the toggling of HairWorks on and off did not change performance. This is what you would expect. There are no HairWorks objects in this scene or nearby. Any performance difference was a result of normal variance and error and is not measurable within our test resolution. These results suggest that HairWorks is not being rendered when no HairWorks objects are present, which is correct. That's how it should be, and is significantly improved over the initial benchmark. We observed the same correct performance behavior out in the middle of the desert where no HairWorks objects were around, and testing in combat versus the first boss mob, a user of HairWorks by the way, we logged an on versus off performance disparity of approximately 7% on Vega 56 with a similar disparity on the GTX 1070. Note that these results are not comparable to our initial benchmark where we discovered the issues, as this is a single mob entity with HairWorks versus a large group of buffalo. that means the boss alone is costing you 7 to 8% of your performance. And in the initial benchmark, we had numerous Buffalo objects that were, again, costing a lot more than that. So we can say for sure that there is a performance hit with HairWorks, and toggling it on versus off does show a difference. So we know that HairWorks is functional on at least certain enemies or mobs that have it. We also know, in at least the 2 test sites that we just sort of spot checked, that HairWorks on versus off shows no difference when there are no HairWorks objects present. This is expected and good behavior. We have not tested the entire benchmark. It's fully possible that there are still instances where a performance deficit exists with HairWorks on when no HairWorks objects are apparent to the player. So it's possible that still exists. This was a much shorter test than our initial one, where we basically spent an entire day researching it. For this one, we're just doing a spot check to build some more data on what Square Enix has been working on, and once the game ships, we'll do another deep dive and see how it looks then. Because at this point, we're so limited with what we can do in the demo, and we don't know what's going to change. So you could understand why there's not a big desire to build a gigantic data set and then have it all wiped out when the actual game ships. However, for now, what we're seeing is that HairWorks LOD scaling appears to be working at least mostly properly in the 2 very quick spot checks. Possible that it's broken elsewhere, but we haven't seen evidence of that yet. And another item of note that's important is that optimization overall is significantly improved. This is something we can say for absolute certain, because if you look around the game, doesn't matter if you use Ansel or not, you can use other debugging tools, because I think some people got hung up on the fact that we were creating video with Ansel previously, but you can use other tools like RenderDoc to basically fetch items out of memory, like meshes, textures, every single pass to draw the frame all the way up till the frame's completion. And RenderDoc is still showing objects that we can't see near the player. However, they are significantly lower level of detail, to the point where it's probably irrelevant that they're being drawn at all. And most of these objects are at least somewhat nearby. So although a lot of overdraw is still happening, the game is still drawing a lot of objects that you can't see on the screen actively. They are lower level of detail, which was true to some extent with the initial benchmark. So it's not like that's completely new, but it does look like either more care was taken since the benchmark, or while they were building this one in parallel with the benchmark, they did a better job with LOD. Either way, optimization is clearly better this time than last. The big question, of course, is how will it carry over to the game? Will we see performance uplift overall? And this is where the next big point comes in, which is that graphic settings are seriously changed from the benchmark, which had 3 presets. Now there are 4 presets: low, average, high, and highest. And of those, only highest has any GameWorks options enabled at all. And interestingly, it is lacking, I think, pretty much all GameWorks options except HairWorks. So Turf was disabled by default from when we looked at the playable demo, and VXAO is still off, and also something you can't change, so it's not in yet. The shadow libraries are defaulted to off with highest settings. So this is a pretty serious change. Before, more options, I think there were 3 from the top of off the top of my head. I think there were 3 GameWorks options that were enabled previously out of 5, and now, not sure about flow, but we know that only HairWorks is on and Turf is off. That's a big difference alone, because those 2 are the biggest contributors to frame rate differences. So in the very least, if you want to get those other options now, you can, but you have to go through custom options. So you can actually set a custom graphics configuration. I know, it's amazing, mind-blowing technology. And the fact that it's changed like this means that when benchmarking or when users are discussing the game, they talk about highest settings. The only really major influence outside of the normal graphics options would be HairWorks. And compared to previously, that's a pretty big improvement, because it will look more fair to all vendors in this configuration. And if you still want the nVidia GameWorks options, which you might, you can enable them separately through a custom graphics configuration. So that's a big change, and we thank Square Enix for, it's not just a GameWorks thing, It's the fact that you can customize graphics now. That was a big concern. So we're glad to see that. And the extra care taken with GameWorks options is also appreciated because we had 1080 Ti's that were struggling to play the game previously. So that's not okay. You could, of course, tune down, but you have to build the game for the lowest common denominator, which is probably someone who doesn't really get what's causing that performance loss. They're just not sure why it's not running well. So it's tuned better now for people who might not be as tech savvy as all of you are. But to recap, better job overall with LOD scaling. There's a better job with object render distance. There's a better job with HairWorks implementation and when it is being called and rendered. And we still observed that many objects in the far distance were coming down the DirectX pipe, down draw calls, but many of them were lower detail. So that eliminates a lot of the performance concern. That's not to say that Final Fantasy 15 is well optimized now. It's not to say that it's clear and free of any issues with or without GameWorks. That really wasn't the only culprit. It was everything was being drawn. So there could still be problems. We'll look into it though when the game launches. For now, just wanted to give you an update, kind of close the story on the beta and pre-launch stuff and say that yes, it looks at least a little bit better. So good news there, but stay tuned. Make sure you subscribe to catch the final launch deep dive that we'll be doing when we're going to double back and really dig into it, make sure that Square Enix did a good job with optimization. And as always, subscribe for more. Go to patreon.com/gamersnexus to help us out directly. We would strongly recommend you watch the first video in this series because it will explain a lot more. We'll put that in one of the cards or something like that. Thank you for watching. You can go to store.gamersnexus.net if you want to pick up one of the Graph logo shirts that I was wearing for this video. I'll see you all next time.